Why do you hate conservatives? By the way, PragerU, not a political organization at all. They have no political affiliation. So legally, they have to be apolitical in order to keep up their status as a nonprofit. They have all like the lawyers and stuff on their back that they know how they can skirt the system to remain legally classified as apolitical and thus a nonprofit. It's pretty messed up. All right, let's do PragerU.
Why do you hate conservatives?
Because they want to take away my rights. Boom.
Well, let's not say hate. Let's
I think you can say hate. I think that it's okay to hate evil. I think that like hating Nazis, for example, that's probably okay, you know?
say dislike, because you don't really hate anyone.
I mean, you wouldn't hate a Nazi? I think come on. Come on.
You may dislike them because they want to ban abortion.
True.
Conservatives say they're all for freedom, but when it comes to a woman's freedom to choose what she wants to do with her own body, they sing a different tune. You may
Also true.
dislike them because they oppress people of color and deny the fact that America is systemically racist.
True. Based on Mala right now.
Conservatives say that everybody is equal regardless of race, and that racism has little to no effect on the daily lives of people of color.
Little to no is very different than equal. Let's be honest. Even if we're trying to concede that there's like a little effect, that's not the same thing as equal, and that's something that's worth addressing at a systemic level.
So, they just ignore the issue altogether.
True.
You may dislike them because they don't believe in climate change. Scientists keep telling us we're overheating the planet, and conservatives don't seem to care.
True.
They're more concerned about profits than people.
Oh my gosh, Amala coming out here with fire right now.
But what good is money if you have no planet to spend it on? You may dislike them because they're obsessed with guns. How are we ever going to stop gun violence if we don't get guns off the streets?
I think it's okay to have guns in America. I think that like minorities should be armed as well. Like in this like in like an ideal society, I wouldn't have guns, but like there's no way we can take away all the guns in America. Like any kind of like gun recall is not going to work. I mean, I'd be okay with like certain reforms for like making it more difficult to, access guns if you say have like mental health conditions and things like that would pose a safety to yourself or others.
And how are we ever going to get guns off the streets if conservatives block every common sense gun law? You may dislike them because they're so intolerant.
True.
What's the harm of calling somebody by their preferred pronouns?
True.
Why can't conservatives just show some compassion instead of obsessing over every kind of behavior they don't like? You may dislike them
true.
because if they got their way, they'd get rid of democracy and establish an authoritarian theocracy.
Literally true. What do you think Jan 6 was?
Bye-bye separation of church and state. Hello, fascism. After all that, you
Did she just call the Republican Party fascist? Are we being open about it now? Is PragerU being open about the Republican Party being fascist?
might sum up conservatives with one word. Ugh. If any of this resonates with you, I get it. I've been there. But, and this surprised me, I found they actually have reasons for thinking the way they do.
Oh, it's okay, guys. Guys, they're fascist because they have reason to be fascist. Guys, it makes sense. Let me explain to you why fascism is good, actually. Amala, where are you going with this? This is insane. Literally going from, yeah, the conservative Republicans, they are kind of fascist, to, they have reasons for being fascist. This is insane.
Here are some of them. On abortion. To start, we can agree that no one likes abortion, but there is a clear divide on the issue. Progressives focus their attention on the mother. Conservatives, while they have compassion for the mother, focus their attention on the baby. They see a human being growing in a mother's womb as innocent and vulnerable. Those babies deserve to be protected, since they obviously can't protect themselves. On rape,
That doesn't give the full prescription as to why the fetus's life overrides the mother's bodily autonomy. That actually doesn't even address the argument. The question is, what is more important, the life of a fetus or the bodily autonomy of the mother? That's the core question here. They're not addressing the core question at all. They're just saying, well, a fetus is a life, which, yeah, that's true. However, we outweigh the bodily autonomy of people than the life of others consistently in our legal system. For example, you have to consent to being an organ donor for them to use your organs if you die. If you do not consent to being an organ donor, they are legally not allowed to use your organs to save the life of another, even adult human being. So legally, we consistently recognize bodily autonomy and choice over the lives of others all the time. Even if you had some kind of, say, like, personal responsibility in the matter, say, like, you got into a car crash with a friend and, like, you died, they would not give your body parts to that friend who may be able to survive with your body parts unless you consented to do so. We legally value bodily autonomy over the lives of others. That's how the legal system works. They're not addressing the core legal question here.
Racism. Conservatives don't deny that racist people exist.
But we're not talking about racist people. We're talking about systemic racism. Let's see how she talks about that.
But when it comes to the narrative of systemic racism, conservatives are unconvinced. Of course, there are disparities in this country.
That's what systemic racism is.
But why assume that these disparities are because of racism?
I think that they're trying to say, how can these systemic disparities be because of the actions of, say, like, racist individuals? Because systemic racism is not about individual actions. It's about how history has consequences, how throughout time, being, disenfranchised in the past will cause your future generations to be disenfranchised socioeconomically. We have a wealth transference from generation to generation, and if you are the descendant of slaves, you did not have an equal playing field from your past generation. And that has continued legally up until the 60s, and in many cases. I mean, like, even redlining wasn't outlawed until after the 60s, right? Like, there are people alive today that experienced institutional racist discrimination against them, and we're going to pretend that doesn't have any kind of lasting effect on people today? That's kind of crazy.
Good schools, good parents, good habits, and good communities would go much further toward alleviating poverty and expanding opportunity than a lifetime of racial justice movements.
That's what racial justice desires. We want to fix these things. That's what we want.
By the way, these rules apply to everyone, regardless of skin color.
So can we get some systemic reparations? She is correctly identifying that, yeah, there are also systems in place which disenfranchise poor people that would affect white people too. Why don't we do reparations along economic lines? This would fix the root issue, and it would also help Black people more than white people on average, because along those economic lines, they are systemically disenfranchised more so than white people. I mean, I think she just made an argument for systemic reparations, which, let's do that. If only the Republican Party supported systemic reparations. They don't support that at all. They are strongly opposed to any kind of infrastructure or bill which would invest in working class families. Yet she made an argument in favor of systemic reparations. I'm so sad. I want the follow through. Let's get some systemic reparations.
Climate change. Conservatives have very little faith in computer models that have been inaccurately predicting disaster for nearly half a century.
Climate change is very different than the type of computer models which try to predict, say, like, where hurricanes are going to go. The very, very different technologies, things that happen in, like, the short term, there's so many, like, abnormalities and things that are constantly changing which directly affect that to a great extent. Meanwhile, something like climate change, this is something that's over the long term, and we can see how there are trends which are holding and that are not changing, that are getting worse and worse in terms of how the planet is heating up. And we know what the effects of a heated up planet would be. That's going to lead to disastrous conditions that have never before existed on the Earth. Even just a little bit of an increase in the global temperature on average has devastating impacts in terms of melting ice caps and raising sea levels and displacing individuals, especially along, say, coastlines.
Conservatives have a lot of faith, however, in human ingenuity to overcome climate.
Then why don't we invest in those things?
What is air conditioning but a human adaptation to the environment? See Miami or Phoenix for further reference. This is not to say we should simply do nothing.
Wait, is she saying just put AC on the Earth?
Power, for example, holds so much promise as a renewable and safe energy source. Conservatives don't understand why environmentalists oppose it. It makes them skeptical and suspicious that the real agenda behind the environmentalist movement is not saving the planet, but giving more power to the government to control people's lives.
Wait, how does investing in green energy give government control over people's lives? Sorry, this argument is so crazy. Nuclear power plants are a great idea. We should absolutely invest in nuclear energy. The only issue with focusing solely on nuclear is that nuclear investments take a very long time for them to pay off. And at the rate at which climate change is happening, we're going to see some negative consequences in the foreseeable future that will pan out before we can switch to, like nuclear energy solutions for the future. And so it's important to diversify our energy profile as much as we can. We should invest in nuclear. We should invest in green energy, solar, wind, air, like recyclable energy, nuclear energy. Nuclear energy actually is recyclable if invested into properly. There are, technology advancements being researched with recyclable nuclear reactors. It's super cool. We should be doing all of this stuff. The most diverse and effective energy profile is the one that we want for the future. And so I guess like the argument's kind of a distraction. It's saying, oh, well, they're just not talking about nuclear, therefore all they're saying is wrong. It's like, no, we have to take everything that's correct. Yes, green energy is good. Yes, nuclear energy is good. Let's invest in all of it. Although, where are Republicans investing in any of this? I don't see Republicans actually proposing any kind of policy which would invest in nuclear energy or green energy or any of this. Like, where are the Republicans actually pushing for nuclear energy? I just don't see it. I think that this is a meaningless distraction because it's not something that Republicans are backing.
On guns, we all want to live in a safe society. This is why firearms are regulated in every state. But we know bad guys will always find a way to get guns. See Chicago and Baltimore for further reference. That's why conservatives want guns, to protect themselves from the bad guys.
So if the argument is there's always going to be, bad people that access something, that's an argument for regulation and legalization, which would also apply to drugs, which I don't think that she would make that same argument when talking about drugs. But yeah, no, this actually is the correct argument to lead into we should regulate these things. We should make sure that, although we recognize that, yeah, there are people that are going to access things that shouldn't be accessing them, we should do all that we can to regulate the stuff to the best we can to make sure that people are as safe as they can be. And so this would apply equally to guns and drugs. But it's interesting how she would never use this argument when talking about drugs.
It's not much more complicated than that. On tolerance, conservatives see tolerance as a two-way street. If someone demands to be addressed by certain pronouns and considers it intolerant if you don't comply, conservatives wonder why that isn't intolerant. Why are a conservative's moral or religious beliefs less worthy of respect than anyone else's?
This argument really fails as soon as we go back to the Civil Rights era and the Civil Rights Act. So, religious conservatives were making the argument that, it's my religious belief, it's my personal belief that I want to not have black people in my business. I do not want to serve black people. I want to keep them out of the public sphere. That's just my personal belief, or even it's their religious belief. There were some pretty racist religious sects back then that truly believed for religious reasons that black people were less than human. Yet it was a good thing when the government did the Civil Rights Act to say, I'm sorry, businesses, but there exist things such as protected classes. You do not get to discriminate people along the lines of protected classes because we want this society to have an equal opportunity. It's essentially, your personal beliefs do not override someone's equal access to society. If we're just going to say, oh, your personal beliefs mean you can be intolerant of someone, that leads to really bad outcomes. That leads to, literally, segregation enforced by businesses. That argument is literally crazy when you put in the context of the civil rights. And as far as like pronouns and stuff, is there even any kind of like legal designation that's like you have to call a trans person by their pronouns? Even like Bill C-16 in Canada, which Jordan Peterson lied and said like would do that, it doesn't like mandate pronoun use legally. If you're not comfortable using a trans person's pronouns because you're like a conservative, you can always just like call them by their name. Like literally, if you believe that you are like religiously sinning by like calling a trans person she, her, or whatever, just like call them by their name. Names are not biological or whatever. Just like call a person by their name. People can change their names. It's accepted. Even the Bible talks about people that change their name. Like literally, Paul, he changed his name. Christians do not dead name Paul.
Conservatives wonder why that isn't intolerant. Why are a conservative...
They wonder why that isn't intolerant. It's intolerant that I have to follow the Civil Rights Act and allow black people into my business. That conservatives believe that is intolerant. Insane.
On authoritarianism. Whenever conservatives win political power, they're typically trying to cut taxes and regulations, make the government smaller, and bolster constitutional freedoms.
Okay, so by cutting taxes and regulations, that means corporate handouts. I'm not even sure what making the government smaller means, because conservatives want to do things like ban abortion and like ban contraceptives and like ban certain types of like that makes the government bigger, if anything. And then by bolster constitutional freedoms,
Like that of speech and religion.
how? What is the policies that they're implementing that like would bolster constitutional freedoms of speech and religion? What are those policies? Can you give me like a specific
That doesn't sound very authoritarian, does it? Progressive policy almost always raises
example.
taxes, expands regulations, increases the size of government, and now curtails free speech.
Where is free speech being curtailed in terms of progressive policy?
To a conservative, that sounds authoritarian.
Where is free speech being limited in terms of like progressive policy? That's insane. Okay, so like first off, on the size of the government, both sides are in trying to increase the size of the government because the government gets things done. That's how you do it. So that point doesn't really apply. Expanding regulations, I think that regulations are a good thing so long as they're just. For example, you know, like making sure that not everybody can just like buy whatever drug they want, but rather putting some regulations on it. Yeah, seems pretty just. It makes sense. And then raising taxes. I mean, overwhelmingly, like what you see is that progressives want to raise taxes on the ultra wealthy. They don't want to raise taxes on the middle class and the lower classes. They want to tax the ultra wealthy so that we can do cool stuff with it. We can invest in infrastructure. Give me trains. Give me public transport. Give me all this cool stuff that just makes the country and the economy easier to access. Invest in the future of the country. Invest in green energy. Invest in nuclear energy. Let's do all of this. Yeah, that seems awesome and based. I love it when the government does stuff that's cool, you know? I love it when billionaires get taxed and then the government can do cool stuff. That sounds like the world I want to live in.
Well, now that you've heard a few of their arguments, do you dislike conservatives less than you did before?
I still dislike conservatives. Heated sidewalks, yeah. They can automatically melt snow. That's so cool. We no longer need to like have people just like throwing out salt all the time. They melt the snow automatically. Super cool. Shelter for the homeless? Yeah. If conservatives want to complain about homeless people existing in parks and whatnot, give them shelter and they won't be in your park anymore. It's that simple.
Not even a little?
It was interesting to see how intentionally vague a lot of those arguments were, and how so many of those arguments are intentionally misleading or do not pass the historical vibe check at all. Especially the discrimination argument. That was insane when you put it in the context of the Civil Rights Act. Literally insane. Okay.